Hello and welcome to the next in the series of Thinking Unbound, where I'm joined by Jonathan Aubrey-Smith and Hasitha Subasinghe from the London Market Practice. The other theme which people find difficult is how do you get your staff kind of aligned with that plan, or get your underwriters onboarded within the plan. We see sort of two particular sort of commentaries on this. We have sort of frontline underwriters who sometimes feel disengaged from that plan, and therefore they don't believe that they can achieve that plan because of the growth that's been put into that plan or unrealistic expectations. And then we see the contrary, that sort of senior management who are responsible for delivering against that plan. They feel that they struggle to implement and align their teams to that particular plan. What should businesses be doing?
I think for me, there's a couple of key themes in that. One is aligning interests between all parties. And I think in reality, how you remunerate your teams is a key part of that. If they're remunerated against their ability to deliver original plan, not reforecast number 7, you are aligning them to making sure they're focused on getting that plan right in the first place. It mitigates for over-optimism or under-optimism, because everybody wants to be able to achieve their plan, because they're going to get remunerated on it. So I think for me, that's remuneration strategy is going to be part of it. But I think also it needs to avoid that siloed based approach where I know the CEO and the CEO sitting down going, we need to get to this. That needs to be understood properly by the frontline teams. In the same way, the frontline teams need to understand those pressures that are on the CEO, the CEO, whoever it might be, because they need to work together collectively, rather than, because there is that danger of it's the us and them, of the underwriting feeling put upon that, oh, my plan's been put up by $5 million or whatever it might be. But they need to understand what is the driver behind that decision-making process. And whilst they may not always think that's the number I would have used, they can support it and they understand it because they've been given the background. It's about a properly integrated business rather than it being function A, function B, not talking to each other. I think we need that consistency of approach. You then end up with a plan that people understand. They don't always love, that they still may feel it's challenging beyond what they can cope with, but at least they understand the whys. And I think if people understand why generally, they're much more able to support a decision. If they think it's just something that's been done to them in any context, they struggle with it and they don't achieve what they're setting out to do. And I think if you then support that with things like a portfolio management teams, dashboards, so the underwriters can see it in a much more live way, and it's easy for them to access. It's easier for the senior leadership to understand what's happening in the business and where it's going and how they can perform moving forward, because they've got the right information in front of them, presented in a way they can easily understand. I think it allows that more cohesive view between the sides.
Just to expand on that. So let's say we're at a typical Lloyd's syndicate, which is a small company, and they may not have the right tools, right? It's highly probable, even though not likely, but they may not have the tools to do that. I think the underwriter should make the plan and articulate that to actuaries or whomever who's doing the business planning. Because the underwriter should own the plan, and there should be a culture where that feeds upwards. And syndicates that are, I would say, successful are when they start with the core function, which is underwriting, and underwriter decides what that is. It's not some number that he or she plucks from the sky. It is a number that's backed by numbers, backed by data, but they should be in charge of articulating that. It may not be in their core skill set. It may be a bit of an actuarial skill set or an accounting skill set, right? That is something that they would need to acquire. But plan number, it should be owned by the underwriter, and it should just cascade upwards.
There's a slight challenge to that.
Yeah.
Is I think it should. Underwriters do need that driving force within the process.
Yeah.
But I also think that underwriters by construction don't know all of the levers that need to be considered in that process. So it does need to be underwriters coming up with the first cut of the plan, but understanding that there are wider pressures on the business, wider expectations from investors, and how that capital is supported. So I think you need a convening process in the middle that manages both sides. That absolutely the underwriter has to have a fundamental part of that process. If they just handed a piece of paper that says your new business plan is $10 million, and they go, well, where's that come from? It doesn't work. But at the same time, I think if you just leave the underwriter completely on their own, I'm not sure it works. It doesn't bring in all of the factors.
I agree. I don't think it's completely on their own. I do think that it needs to be backed by data. Yeah, the business planning. If you draw it like if you think of it as a map to get to your destination, right? We spend ages drawing the road and every pothole on the road, every pavement stone on the road, every signpost on the road. We may not even know what the destination is. So I think it's nice to have a broad brush to get you to destination, and then the person that really understands the craft can articulate the potholes, the stone on the way, the signpost on the way. But then that articulation has to be backed by data, right? I think then the two will meet and kind of come to one plan.
I think there's an interesting point in there in terms of getting proper ownership of results, plan figures, by the relevant people. I think one of the things that we always see is sometimes if an underwriting team comes up with a plan loss ratio, and then once they start writing the business in the subsequent year, their kind of underwriting price loss ratios deviate substantially from their plan loss ratio, and then you ask the question, well, what number do you believe your business is going to perform to? Is it your price loss ratio or your plan loss ratio? And quite often what we hear is underwriters say, well, no, it's still my plan loss ratio, but then their price loss ratios are 5-10 points more optimistic than that. And I think that there needs to be a system in place where those two figures start to conform, and actually underwriters have the tools to be able to understand that, okay, if their belief is still that the plan loss ratio is the right figure, what are the changes that need to be implemented within their pricing tools? And how do they deliver those changes and understand those and achieve consistency throughout the cycle so that they get better conformity in that process?
That might be lending towards the culture and kind of remuneration point that you've raised as well, because I've noticed that, yes, there are two loss ratios. There's the plan number, which may be slightly conservative, and then the best estimate, which is what they truly think it's going to run at. Yeah. And it does change by company to company, and depending on the size of the company as well. Yeah.
And just picking up on that point in terms of, typically what you tend to see is, you'll have an underwriting team and then you'll have an actuarial pricing team which will support those underwriters. What do you think is the right support from the actuarial pricing team to the underwriting team? What does that look like?
There's multiple schools of that, right? So there's the one where it's like a bit of a control function, and then there's ones that are helping transact the business. And I can see positives for both sides. I think when you're smaller and you're starting up, it's more to do with helping transact the business, which will highlight the price of the underwriter, help which points to negotiate on, and complete that transaction. As you grow to a much larger scale, it's not possible to scale that little feature without scaling the number of individuals. So I think then it becomes more like a control function. Yep.
I think there's some value there. But I think even in big organisations, having that pricing team or the pricing individuals embedded within the teams, as opposed to it being a third-party group that sits outside of their world, I think leads to a scenario where there's more ownership between the underwriters and the pricing teams about what those pricing models are. There's more proactive thought going into that pricing process, rather than it being the underwriters were doing what they were doing anyway and then they're paying lip service to a model. If they are wholly invested in that model and it's part of their team to help develop it and maintain it and move it forward, you end up with a much greater alignment between the pricing assumptions and what's being done on the ground. Otherwise, you end up in this situation where pricing is this separate thing to underwriting, and you end up in a situation where, clearly that's not ideal, because you're going to end up with two different answers. We need to align those two business units or two functions together so they can both understand the power of what actuaries bring to the process, but also the power of what an underwriter is bringing to that process. That understanding of the real underlying risk, what's going on in that business, what's going on with that particular client, what's going on with the business relationship with the brokers. It's a different facet that's got to feed in, and it's making sure that you're wedding the two skill sets together. And I think if there's a danger if you have a central pricing team, you're taking away that really powerful skill set from that frontline operation, which I think is key to success of.
One of the best tests to see if it's properly embedded is actually to see if underwriters use the model that was built and there is no side calculation on another spreadsheet or on another model. If you have this side calculation on another spreadsheet, then clearly things have gone wrong. Yeah, you're not embedded into the pricing function properly of the business. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Jonathan and Has, for a very engaging discussion on the challenges of business planning in the London market. Please join us in the future for the next in the series of Thinking Unbound.